wish that I could tell you that Trump was just building a ballroom. I wish that I could tell you that this was all being paid for by private donors. And I wish that I could tell you that I was done finding things. But I can't. Because I've spent the last 2 months reading court filings, pulling federal contracts, and now I know more about setback requirements and pedimented porticos than any person on this platform should. That is not a flex, by the way. That is fully a cry for help. So my last video about Trump not building a ballroom clearly struck a nerve with a lot of you. I mean, it got over 1 million views on YouTube. Over 1 million people watched it, which is absolutely wild. It's crazy. And I think it resonated because a lot of you, not unlike myself, were already feeling like something was up with this project, you know? Like something didn't quite add up. Something wasn't smelling quite right. And as it turns out, you were right. I was right. We were right. Because since that video, they've started to say the quiet part out loud. And that's what today's video is going to be about. So strap in, baby, because it is going to be a bumpy ride. But before we get into all of that, my name is Dre, and welcome to the Dre Dossier. Over here, we like to get a little crazy, and we like to follow the money, we like to track the infrastructure of power, and most importantly, we like to name names. Now, every video comes paired with a full essay, which will be available on my Substack, the Dre Dossier, and that's where you'll see all of my sources, receipts, links, everything indexed at the bottom, because I don't want to tell you what to think, I just want to show you how I got my answers. So if you find this kind of information valuable, then please like this video and subscribe to my channel, because this is the kind of work I want to keep doing with you guys, and your support makes all of this possible. So thank you very much. Now, one last thing before we get started, I'd like to dedicate today's video to my grandmother who passed away earlier today. Now, she and I did not agree on much of, well, anything. We had very different politics, very different views on life, very different views on just about anything you could possibly disagree about. But you know what? There is one thing that we did see eye to eye on, and that's the fact that we don't want the government spending any of our damn money without showing some receipts. So Nana, if you're watching me, and I know you are, Lord knows you're gonna haunt me, this one's for you. Now let's go investigate so we can show Doge what sussing out government fraud really looks like. Okay, so since my last video, 3 things happened. They confirmed that a top secret facility is in fact being built underneath the East Wing. A federal judge called the whole funding scheme a Rube Goldberg contraption. And I'm pretty sure this thing is about to get a hell of a lot bigger and a hell of a lot more secret because the Department of Justice pre-filed a national security appeal before the judge even ruled. So let's start with the big one. So on January 19th, CNN reported with what they called a high degree of confidence that every subterranean structure beneath the East Wing has been demolished. Yep, you heard that right. The POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, and all of the heating and ventilation systems and the underground facilities used by the White House and the military office and the Secret Service are all gone. All of them. And according to that same CNN report, what's going in its place is a new facility that's designed with, quote, modern technology to address the new and evolving threats, end quote. And the threats they specified included nuclear detonations, aircraft impacts, chemical and biological attacks, and electromagnetic pulses. Come on, it wouldn't be 2026 without some EMPs now, would it? Jonathan Wackrow, a former Secret Service agent, put it this way on CNN, quote, you have to think about a facility that can be built in secret, highly classified, and that can sustain the current and future state of threat environments, end quote. Oh, and this next part really got me. He said, and I quote, we are never going to get the line of sight on how much that costs, end quote. That's kind of a weird thing to say for a project that's being funded by private donors, right? This project is being funded by private donors, right? Yeah. No, because whatever's actually expensive about this project, you know, like the classified, hardened, EMP-proof, nuclear survivable part underneath, it's coming from us. We're paying for that. And based off that research, it seems that money is coming from classified appropriations that nobody can see and nobody can audit. Okay, so the donors are paying for the ballroom and we're paying for the bunker. Got it. Actually, on second thought, that does raise one question, actually, which we'll circle back to at the end of the video. But if the donors are just paying for the ballroom, then what are they getting out of it for $400 million? What does a company like Microsoft or Palantir or Lockheed Martin actually get in return for donating to the world's most expensive construction project? Because I don't think the answer is a nice dinner invite. I think the ballroom buys them a seat in whatever is being built underneath. First, let me tell you what they said on the record. So on January 8th, a public meeting of the National Capital Planning Commission, a man named Josh Fisher, who is the White House representative to the commission, stood up and said, quote, There are some things regarding this project that are, frankly, of top secret nature. End quote. Now, when I tell you that was the most enraging, blood-boiling statement to hear after sitting through a 3-hour meeting with the NCPC, that's what you're gonna give us? Quite frankly, it's just top secret nature. You think we're idiots? And I'll leave the link to the meeting and the transcript over on my Substack, should you be so inclined to dive in. See, Fisher then told the commission that the underground work needed to be considered when doing this project, but was not part of the NCPC process. And then the OMB chief separately indicated that the bunker was a separate driver of the whole ballroom project. Separate driver? Is it part of the project or not? So they are saying that they're publicly separating the ballroom from the thing underneath it. They're calling the thing underneath it top secret, and they're telling the oversight body, the people whose literal jobs it is to review this kind of work, that the top secret part is none of their business. And then, and I almost missed this because everything went by so fast because I was just in a blur of rage, Fisher also mentioned, almost as like an aside, that the project also includes unspecified improvements to Lafayette Park. You know, the park that's directly across the street from the White House? Yeah, that park. And he just kind of said it and moved on, and nobody in the room pressed him on it. But the NCPC Commissioner Phil Mendelson did catch it. After the meeting, he wrote a letter stating that he was very concerned that the public was just learning about this for the first time. Yeah, low-key, guys, that NCPC meeting was lit. There was a lot of information dropped on us there. We learned about the addition to the West Wing that they're talking about, you know, on the other side.
I did mention the potential for a future addition, a one-story addition to the West Wing, and that would occur right here. And you can see that the reason to think about that is so that we would reinstate the symmetry around the central pavilion.
To really give it that compound effect, the visitor center in Lafayette Park, and that the president's plans should be, and I'm quoting the administration, considered in total, not piecemeal. And keep that word in the back of your mind, because I have a feeling that it's going to come back up later. And look, I just want to be clear about something before we go any further here. I don't think it's inherently wrong to invest taxpayer money into protecting the White House and our military infrastructure, even though wars are inherently evil. But preparing for the worst is not the problem. See, the problem is when you put a guy whose entire real estate career is built off of inflated costs, hidden deals, and skimming off the top in charge of classified construction projects. And then you surround him with tech companies and tech oligarchs who have a direct financial interest in their infrastructure being the thing that gets installed in said bunker. That's the part that matters. That is what this whole video, this whole series has been about. The classified facility underneath. Because while we're the ones funding that, they're the ones putting their technology in the facility underneath. And it's all going through money that no elected representative is allowed to look at. And I'm sorry, but you are not about to sell that to me as national defense when that is clearly just a business arrangement with no government oversight. And that is what I have a problem with. Now, I want to bring you back to a moment that the press kind of shrugged off and the public made fun of, but I think it's actually a very telling moment, and it's one that I've been thinking about ever since I saw it happen. So on the same day as that NCPC meeting on January 8th, Trump was hosting a meeting of his own at the White House with about 24 oil and gas CEOs. Yeah, you know the one with Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Halliburton, Marathon, Valero. Nearly 20 companies were represented, including Harold Hamm, the veteran oil wildcatter. Now, if the name Harold Hamm sounds familiar to any of you, it's because he's also a name on the ballroom donor list. In fact, I think he's the only executive in that room that is on the ballroom donor list. Now, the context of this meeting matters, and I go deeper into it on the Substack, but here's what you need to know for the purposes of this story. The U.S. had just captured Nicolas Maduro, and Trump was pressing these oil executives to commit at least $100 billion of their own money to rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure. And it's worth noting that the oil executives were very nervous, understandably so, and they'd been scrambling for days trying to figure out how to handle this meeting. ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods flat out told Trump to his face that Venezuela is uninvestable in its current state because Exxon has had its assets seized there twice before. ConocoPhillips had the same concern. I mean, the question in that room was overwhelmingly simple. If we pour billions into a country that just had a regime change, how do we know that our investment is safe? And here's what Trump told them. He said, quote, "You have total safety. You're dealing with us directly." And then, mid-meeting, Trump gets up, walks over to the window, and stares out at the construction site of the former East Wing. And the press had a frickin' field day with this. Yahoo ran the headline, "Trump 79 wanders off to gaze at non-existent building," and the New Republic called it the weirdest moment in a meeting this year. I mean, everybody was treating it like confusion, a senior moment, or that he was getting up to pass gas. But here's what Trump actually said when he turned back to face a room full of oil executives who had just been asking how their $100 billion investment would be protected. He talked about bulletproof glass, drone-proof ceilings, and then he used the phrase, quote, "everything else, unfortunately, that you need today," End quote. I don't think that was a senior moment. I think he was showing them what that investment is building. Not just a ballroom, not just protection, but rather the infrastructure that their money, their technology, and their systems are going to live inside of for a very, very long time. So now here's where we get into the part where we talk about who's paying for what. And I need you to follow this closely because it gets a little lawyerly, but it really matters, trust me. Because the government is now on record saying two things that directly contradict each other, and both of them cannot be true at the same time. One statement comes from Fisher on that January 8th NCPC meeting. He told the commission that the underground work, quote, does not preclude us from changing the above grade structure, end quote. In other words, meaning that the ballroom and the thing underneath it are two separate projects, that you could change one without changing the other. And statement 2 comes from the Department of Justice in a court filing from February 2nd. And according to Reuters reporting on that filing, the DOJ argued that it is unworkable to distinguish between construction elements that are national security related and those that are not. AKA, you cannot pull them apart. They are one thing. They are one project. How can both be on the official record, both be in formal filings, and yet they contradict each other directly? Okay, so let's think about what each one of these statements means. Because if Fisher is right and they're separable, then that means a judge could halt the ballroom theoretically tomorrow, and the bunker could just keep going. It could just keep getting built. But if the DOJ is right and they are inseparable, then that means whatever the Planning Commission was reviewing was a flat-out lie, because the structural requirements of a classified facility designed to survive nuclear detonations would dictate the foundations, the load-bearing capacity, and the entire footprint of the building above it, and the Commission never saw any of that. I mean, Fisher straight up told them to their faces that the classified work wasn't any of their concern. Either way, and I really cannot stress this enough, the ballroom is not the primary project. And if the words don't convince you of that, then perhaps the numbers will, because the price of this thing is genuinely unhinged. In July of 2025, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that the ballroom would cost $200 million. And then in September, Trump said that it would cost around $250 million. And then by October, it was up to $300 million. And then by December, $400 million. And then on February 3rd, in classic Trump fashion, he posted on Truth Social in the morning that the ballroom was going to cost $300 million. And on that same day, just later that afternoon, he told reporters $400 million, $300 at breakfast, $400 by lunch, and then by February 10th, we're back down to $300 million, and he's saying that they're on budget and they're ahead of schedule. And what budget? Which budget? The breakfast budget or the lunch budget? Because it keeps changing, my guy. I mean, even if you set aside the fluctuation problem of those numbers, it is still an outrageous price for a ballroom. I mean, $200 million to $400 million? You could plate the thing in gold and it would still come in for less than that. So for context, and I looked this up, the most expensive luxury residential square footage in the country runs about $2,000 to $3,000 per square foot. And that is on the upper end. At 90,000 square feet, even at the absolute top of the luxury market, you're talking at most $270 million for the whole thing. And that is if you're building the most extravagant thing physically possible. And the fact that the number swings by $100 million within the same day, that is not an accounting difference. That's sleazy. Lest we forget, this is a man who spent his entire career in real estate, inflating numbers, skimming off the top, and making the math work out in his favor, and now he can't even keep his own stories straight anymore. On January 22nd, and on that very same day, the brand new CFA received a ballroom presentation for the first time. Yeah, it's easy. Just handpick the review board the same day it's supposed to start reviewing stuff. Now, luckily, I'm not the only person seeing this story clearly, because there is one person who sees the full picture, and that's Judge Richard Leon. He's a Bush appointee, and he's on the D.C. District Court hearing the lawsuit that the National Trust filed in December. And I have to say that his comments from the January 22nd hearing almost made the hours I've spent reading legal filings worth it. Almost. The government's lawyers tried comparing this project to Gerald Ford installing a swimming pool, and Judge Leon's response was something to the effect of, "Are you effing kidding me? Be realistic." He even went as far as to call the funding scheme a Rube Goldberg contraption. And then he asked a question that I think everybody should be asking. Why didn't Trump just go to Congress? I mean, come on, Republicans control both chambers. They could have authorized this in one afternoon, but he chose not to. And I think that choice is very telling, because going to Congress means hearings, it means questions on the record, and it means somebody might ask what's going on underneath. And methinks they're running out of time and excuses. And here's where it gets really frustrating, because as of today, Judge Leon still hasn't ruled and the DOJ isn't waiting. On February 2nd, before Leon has issued any decision, the DOJ pre-filed a motion to stay whatever ruling he eventually makes on national security grounds, with 2 classified Secret Service declarations attached. I mean, the fact that they filed an appeal before there was anything to appeal tells me that they have no plans of stopping. I mean, they're effectively telling the judge, it doesn't matter what you decide, because the second you rule, we invoke national security and take it to the D.C. circuit. and the DC Circuit will very likely grant a stay because courts do not love overriding national security claims. A stay means that the construction continues while the appeal plays out, which can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And by then, the building is done, if not mostly done, and the case is moot and everybody just moves on with their lives. The strategy is not to win in court, it's to run out the clock. That's what Trump's been doing his entire career. Okay, so let's talk about Shalom Baranes, the architect, a little bit more. I covered his Pentagon work in part 1, but what I've learned since then is that this man's entire career is one move. He makes things that are designed to stop attacks look like things that are designed to look nice. For example, at Lafayette Square, he designed perimeter bollards for the federal courthouse that are just meant to look like historic streetscape. Cast iron, painted black, 42 inches high, spaced evenly. He builds these level 5 security apparatuses and tunnels and connections and all of it wrapped in architecture that looks like it's been there for 100 years. And I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty impressive. Just objectively, as a craft, what this guy does is genuinely a very cool feat of design. I mean, think about it. He takes something that's supposed to stop a car bomb and he makes it look like it's a gas lamp from 1870. And I respect that kind of skill. But that doesn't mean that I'm not watching you, Baranes, because I happen to find some contracts that I would like to bring to the public's attention. But before we get into those, I want to give you some geopolitical context about why what I'm about to show you matters, because this part is really important and it's the part that most people aren't connecting. So back in January of 2025, the Financial Times published satellite images of a massive construction site happening about 20 miles southwest of Beijing. It looked to be around 1,500 acres with over 100 cranes going at the same time. And because of these deep underground pits, journalists deduced that there were tunnels connecting everything. U.S. intelligence officials told the Financial Times that when it's finished, this thing, which they're calling Beijing's military city, will be nearly 10 times the size of the Pentagon. Hardened underground bunkers, AI-enabled command control systems designed to survive nuclear first strikes. And at the speed in which it's progressing, it's expected to be operational by 2027, which, by the way, it's worth noting is the same year U.S. officials believe that Xi Jinping wants to be ready to move in on Taiwan. A lot to unpack there. All right, so that's happening on the other side of the world right now. And as you can imagine, our administration, which admittedly has a very complicated relationship with China, sometimes we're in a trade war with them, sometimes we're in an AI arms race with them, sometimes we're selling them AI chips, and sometimes we're banning TikTok, sometimes we're not. It's all a whole thing. But the point being is that the US is very much aware that China is building a next-generation underground command infrastructure. And so that's the context I want you to keep in mind for what I'm about to show you next. So in my research for this, I went on to HireGov, which is a federal contract database that anybody can access, by the way. And I started sifting through Baranes' firm to see if there were any other projects going on while he's working on the East Wing. I found 3 contracts, all of which were awarded within 17 days of each other in September of 2025. And what do you know? 3 different federal properties, all of which are within the perimeter of the White House complex. And I've linked every single one of those contracts on my Substack so you can pull them up and look at them for yourself. So the first one I pull up is from September 9th, 2025, and it's a $400,000 contract from the GSA White House branch for Baranes to do moisture investigation work at the Blair House. Now, the Blair House is the president's guest house, and it's about 1,000 feet from the East Wing site. And seeing that this is a moisture investigation makes me really, really nervous. Because if I'm remembering correctly, back from that January 8th NCPC meeting, that was the same justification that was used to demolish the East Wing in the first place. It was the moisture, mold, and structural decay, and that's why they tore it down before they asked for any NCPC review or oversight.
The colonnade was structurally unstable, the roof systems had exceeded their service life, and the underpinnings were not sufficient to support the necessary upgrades. In the East Wing, there was chronic water intrusion, accelerated deterioration, and mold contamination.
Now I'm looking at the same architect hired by the same GSA office doing a moisture study over at the property right next door. Now, the other interesting thing about the Blair House is that it's over 200 years old and it sits on 19th century foundations. And it's about the same distance from the East Wing as the confirmed Treasury Tunnel at 761 feet. I mean, if this study comes back and recommends major excavation, and with foundations that old, I mean, come on. They have the exact same playbook loaded and ready to go. Now, I'm not saying that's definitely happening, but I am telling you to probably keep a close eye on that one. So then I pull up the second contract, and it's for September 26th, a $617,000 feasibility study for the GSA's own headquarters at 1800 F Street. And what's weird about that one in particular is that on December 1st, this contract was modified and accelerated by 6 weeks. And the modification language, which I'm going to read directly from the contract from my screen, says, quote, schedule compression to identify design and construction costs to commence funding requests as soon as possible, end quote. And separately, GSA has requested $219 million for phase 2 of that building's modernization. And then there's the third one, which is also for September 26th, for $870,000 for construction management on perimeter security bollards at USDA Lot 9, the Witten building, which on the surface seems totally normal. But then I pulled the NCPC project documents for that site, and I found that it sits directly above the WMATA metro tunnels and the GSA steam tunnels. And look, all of this might just be coincidences or just normal procurement, but when I take a step back and I look at all of this, these 3 contracts, the same architect who's designing the ballroom, who rebuilt the Pentagon, the same 17-day window, 3 federal properties, all within walking distance of the White House, and then I think back to the Beijing military city and what they're building, and I don't know what all of this adds up to, but I do know what it looks like. It looks like the early stages of something much bigger than just one building. And remember what I told you to keep in the back of your mind? Fisher casually mentioning this unspecified improvements to Lafayette Park, along with Mendelssohn's word, piecemeal? Well, get a load of this, because Lafayette Park sits on top of its own underground infrastructure, the same Lafayette Square where Baranes has already designed the security bollards. Now add Blair House to the west, and GSA headquarters to the south, and the USDA building sitting on top of the metro and steam tunnels. And you start to see this perimeter forming. Sure, it might not be 1,500 acres like Beijing Military City, but the same idea. A connected, hardened underground network built contract by contract, moisture study by moisture study, all within walking distance of the White House. But let me take a step back and be very clear about what it is that I know and what it is that I think, because this is where I think people are going to run into conspiracy land, and I don't want that. What I know is that there is a confirmed classified facility being built underneath what was the East Wing. And I know that the oversight bodies can't see it. And I know that the courts are being outrun. And I know that the cost changes hour by hour. I also know that Congress was never asked, and that the same architect is picking up contracts at federal buildings around the perimeter in the same 17-day window. All of that is on the record. Now, what I think is that the donors are going to tell you a lot about what this is actually about. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Palantir, Booz Allen Hamilton, Lockheed Martin, and Open Secrets noted that on January 13th that these same ballroom donors are poised to benefit from the AI plan that they helped shape. Though if I'm being honest, I don't know that that was ever a secret. These aren't people who care about going to dinner. These are people who build AI systems, that build cloud infrastructure, surveillance platforms, and classified intelligence networks. They build the things that go inside a facility like the one that is being built right now. And that's what really scares me, not the bunker, not the tunnels, not even the money. Although my Nana's ghost and I are both pretty pissed about the money still. What worries me is that whoever's AI is getting installed down there becomes the default. It becomes how the executive branch processes intelligence and makes decisions and analyzes threats and potentially surveils its citizens. And whatever data is used to train those systems gets baked into the foundation, literally, and it's really, really hard to untrain, if at all possible. You don't just get to swap that out when a new president takes office. In many ways, it becomes a permanent layer of governance that nobody voted for. And to all of the people who claim to be on the side of the people but are clearly letting this happen, this is not just a right now problem. I'm thinking about my future kids, if I even have them at this point, or other people's kids or their grandkids. What are we setting up for them? Which brings me to this last thing that I saw and have to talk about. On February 10th, Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, "When completed, it will be the finest ballroom ever built anywhere in the world, one that has been sought by presidents for over 150 years, and now they are getting the best," end quote. And then he continues on, quote, "Because of its unprecedented structural, safety, and security features, it will also be used for future presidential inaugurations," end quote. See, I don't know about that one. That's weird. Future presidential inaugurations. This coming from the man who puts his name on stakes, on a university, on a board game, on buildings he didn't even build. He has never once, not one time in his 79 pathetic years of life, done something generous, especially for a successor. This man is so incapable of not thinking about himself that he didn't even show up to Biden's inauguration, the most basic act of democratic grace there is, and he couldn't be bothered. So now he's a philanthropist of they're getting the best? They, the future presidents? Since when does Donald Trump get excited about other people getting something that he wants? Which makes me even more concerned for what's being built down there. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, he's building the ballroom because he doesn't plan on leaving. I think it's worse than that. I think that that's his way of telling us that he doesn't care who gets inaugurated next, because by then, the AI's trained, the surveillance architecture is running, and it's all been poured into the foundation and sealed under the roof of a very nice ballroom. So don't get it twisted, because Trump is not building a legacy. He's building an operating system. And the companies that paid for the ballroom don't need him forever. Because remember, the ballroom was never the project. The ballroom was always the lid.